Hi, this is Professor Robert Alexander, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 1. This is lecture number 3, Human Sexuality. And I want you to take notes because some of these questions, some of these topics, they're going to come up on the test. So make sure you're paying attention and you have your notepad ready. All right, we're going to go ahead and get into it. Again, this is Chapter 1, Perspectives on Human Sexuality. Now, before we start with the chapter, I want you to know that sexuality was once hidden from our view in our culture, but over the past generations, over the past decades, sexuality has become more open. And not only is sexuality not hidden from the view, but it surrounds us everywhere we go, from media to television to movies. It's a part of our life. So in this chapter, we're going to discuss why we study human sexuality. This is a class that is taken at all of the main colleges, the Stanfords, the Harvards, the UC Berkeleys. We're going to examine popular culture and the media and to see how they shape our ideas about sexuality. Then we want to look at how sexuality has been treated in different cultures and in different times in our history. Lastly, we're going to examine how society defines various aspects of sexuality as being natural and unnatural, moral and immoral, right and wrong. Okay, I'm going to be trying to break how you're thinking in terms of right and wrong over the course of this quarter in terms of sexuality. Now, studying sexuality, we're going to look at popular cultures, across cultures and time, societal norms. Being sexual is an essential part of being human. Okay, sexuality can be a source of great pleasure, profound satisfaction. It can also be a source of uncertainty. We know that we need sex in order to reproduce, bring a new life into the world, transforming ourselves into mothers and fathers. At the same time, paradoxically, sexuality can also be a source of guilt, confusion, anger, disappointment, and a pathway to infection and a means of exploitation and aggression. Throughout our lives, we make sexual choices based on our experience. We use our attitudes, our values, things that we've been taught from childhood, our knowledge. Our sexuality evolves as we ourselves evolve. So what we need to understand is studying sexuality for all these reasons is a better way to gain insight into sexuality in terms of our relationships, how to become more comfortable with ourselves, how to explore personal sexual issues, to dispel anxieties and doubts that we have, to validate sexual identity, to resolve traumatic experiences, to learn about sexually transmitted diseases, infections, unintended pregnancies. Many of us find that the study of sexuality can be empowering. We start to develop the ability to make intelligent, wise sexual choices based on our own needs, our desires, our values, rather than ignorance, rather than feeling pressured, rather than guilt. Okay, rather than conforming to societal norms. The study of human sexuality differs from the study of any other discipline because human sexuality is surrounded by a lot of taboos, fears, prejudice, and even hypocrisy. So for many, sexuality creates this ambivalent feeling. It's linked to not only intimacy, but pleasure. But again, it's also linked to shame. So this particular slide shows how much we contribute in terms of digital in the field of human sexuality. So, of course, online, things that are happening on the internet, our cell phone, and television, those are going to be the top leaders. Okay, so the media, they're the most powerful forces in young folks' lives. Watching TV, playing video games, texting, listening to music, searching the internet to provide constant streams of messages, imagery, expectations around sexuality, values about which are very hard to resist. Okay? So, in terms of promoting sexual health and well-being, understanding the media's prominence and the role in people's lives, I mean, this is crucial. This is essential. All right. Mass media Mass media depictions of sexuality are meant to entertain and exploit, is not meant to inform. So as a result, the media doesn't really do a good representation of real depictions of sexuality. The various media outlets, the social context of sexuality, like the programs, plots, movies, stories, and articles, newscasts, they tell us what behaviors are appropriate, with whom they are appropriate, with whom are the viewers. So again, it's meant to exploit. It's meant to entertain. It's not really meant for education. So when you're looking at it, you have to look at these things with a grain of salt. Okay, you have to use your own knowledge, your own self-awareness. So even when we're thinking about men's and women's magazines, men magazines have been singled out for pretty much sexual emphasis. We have Hustler, we have Playboy, we have King magazine, we have Maxim. Even Sports Illustrated does once a year where we have the swimsuit edition. So it would be a mistake to think that only male-oriented magazines focus on sex, because women magazines, they have their own sexual content, but these magazines tend to be romantic photographs of lovers to illustrate stories. Pre-adolescents and young teens are not exempt from sexual images, so everybody looks at it. Okay, if you have a magazine in the house, it's not going to stop your young child, boy or girl, from looking at this magazine. So the magazines typically have things in them that target the reader, right? So for women, it tends to lean heavily on romantic topics, things that have to do, if you think about like a Cosmopolitan magazine, you're looking at things that have to do with how to attract that male partner, or things to do to keep a man. These are some of the things that women's magazines will focus on, right? So in reality, it doesn't become sexy or popular by consuming a certain product, but the product may actually be detrimental to one's own sexual well-being. Just like cigarettes and alcohol, we have to look at it with a grain of salt. Okay, so this happens in advertising, books, tabloids, and especially on online social networks. Now, when we talk about TV, among all things, these are the most prevalent, pervasive, and vexing corner of the public and private space, because it shapes our consciousness. It defines reality and entertains multiple people, entertains the masses. At the same time, most of the consumption of television leaves the majority of young people outside of adults, young folks outside of adult comment, and with few messages of images that demonstrate the risk and the responsibility. So even though it has a high level of sexual content, it may not have a high level of talking about the consequences of engaging in unprotected sex. And that's what we have to be critical and conscious of. So ratings and V-chips, right? One of the things we have to do as parents, I'm a parent, some people in my class have been parents, you may be a parent in the future, is we want to educate not only the parents, but we want to educate our children about what it means to be responsible, in terms of using protection. Even in allowing certain images not to come through on the television. There's a V-chip. There's codes that you can put in for Netflix, for all of the programs that are going to have adult TV shows like HBO, Cinemax, and Showtime. Okay, there are codes, there are V-chips, there are ways to block your young children from viewing, and we have to look at all of these aspects in order to educate and to help kind of control the images that we want our young viewers to see. Even on like regular TV shows, like regular TV channels like MTV, VH1, BET, the internet programs are very popular among adolescents. We know this, right? Even from the music videos, young female artists, they bring a lot of energy, sexuality to it. I'm thinking of like Beyonce. I'm thinking of Rihanna. I'm thinking of either Taylor Swift, Britney Spears. These are folks, even males, from Usher to to the Jonas Brothers. There's a lot of sexual imagery that comes about in music videos. And we can't ignore that. The thing we can do is to educate and inform. Okay, even in video games, right? I'm thinking, I may date myself because Call of Duty was such a big deal when I was younger, and it still is. It has sexual imagery in many of the video games that are popular. Some of our feature-length films, portray consequences of unprotected sex, and oftentimes they don't. But being an informed, educated viewer is a way to kind of dismantle what TVs and movies are designed to do, and that's purely to entertain. So, sexuality in popular culture and the media, gay men, lesbian women, bisexual, transgendered, they're often integrated into mainstream, and it's slowly happening over time, right? It has slowly happened over the last couple of decades. However, typically when a gay man or a lesbian woman appear, they are frequently defined in terms of their sexual orientation. The gay man is generally stereotyped as being effeminate, flighty, arty, or they may be closeted. Like we may not know until the end of the show, right? When lesbian women are often portrayed as being super feminine or being very butch, stilettoed. Okay, so nowadays we have more and more coming out stories that have to do with the standard of the television show. Okay, that deal with gay characters. However, it wasn't until recently that these characters have become younger. So now in 2020 and before, we have more younger, gay, transsexual, queer, questioning, or individuals that are just unsure about their sexual identity. And they expose the vulnerability of young people in either junior high, high school, in terms of being bullied. There's a various amount of stories in which homosexual adults are marginalized and stereotyped. Many of the newer shows for young audience, it sends a consistent message that you will be accepted for who you are. And that's not always the case. So there's always that dilemma on whether or not who to trust and when is a good time to come out. So the media should do a much better job of portraying more healthier sexual relations as opposed to unhealthy sexual relationships, and it needs to do a better job of having education around it. Now, online social media. Now, a lot of theorists, they become concerned with the facts that social media, online social networks can be isolating. They can be alienating in terms of it's quite different than face-to-face communication. All right, the power, the influence that it has. Sometimes folks can be anonymous. They take the personal aspect out of it. Now, this is just one viewpoint. Okay, so the internet has also expanded the ways in which people can meet. Right, we have plenty of fish. We used to have. There was Craigslist. There was eHarmony. There are Tinder. Right, there's Grindr. There's all of these internet websites where folks can just hop on, and meet somebody, right? Where we didn't have this at our disposal 15, 20 years ago. So it's apparent, social media is here to stay. I'm thinking about Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They are integrated. They are a part of our regular lives. Okay, young adults in the United States and worldwide, the popularity, it can't be underestimated. It is here to stay. There are over 1 billion global users of social media, right? And the additional 2 billion that use other platforms outside of Facebook and Instagram. Facebook and Instagram right now are the most popular ones. And it is obvious that this is going to be something that is hard to compete with, and it isn't going anywhere soon. Right? But, like other media, the internet doesn't simply provide sexual culture. It also kind of shapes the culture, the widespread use of online dating, right? It's becoming more and more accepted. This is a way that folks, are meeting new people. Okay. So sexting is something that has become more popular in the last 10 years. This is when you can flirt in a highly sexual manner. There can be nude shots being sent from person to person, um, pictures of the anatomy, dick pics, right? This is becoming more and more popular. So this diagram shows the percentage of people based on age that do it the most. So 18 to 24, they are leading the league in sexting, right? 25 to 34 is the second category, right? The blue is folks that receive text. The purple or burgundy are the ones that send text, right? And in the yellow is the ones that forward text to somebody else. So that could be a third party or what have you. So we get down to the 35 to 44, it's kind of in the middle. 45 to 54, they don't do it as much. And the 55 plus do it the least. So this is an age thing. This is more popular among age demographics. Okay, so now we're going to get into sexuality across cultures. Now, so many of the things that I'm going to describe, you may think of it as unnatural, you may think of it as wrong, immoral, but you have to look at it from a cultural standpoint. Okay, so what we see as natural in our culture may be viewed as unnatural in others, right? Culture takes our sexual interests into account. Okay, our inclinations to act sexually, it molds and shapes. Sometimes it celebrates sexuality, and other times it's condemning. But sexuality can be viewed as a spiritual enlightenment. As in the Hindu tradition, it could also be at war with the divine. So we look at Judeo-Christian tradition. Among the variety of factors that shape how we feel and behave sexually, culture is possibly the most powerful. Okay, so cultures assume that adults have the potential for becoming sexually aroused and for engaging in sexual intercourse for the purpose of reproduction. So some of these cultures that I'm going to describe, these beliefs in turn affect the level of desire expressed in these cultures. So the first one, I want to talk a little bit about manjaya. Okay, now if you are viewing this at home or wherever, you can practice saying this. This is manjaya. Now, manjaya, they come from Polynesia. Okay, of Polynesia, they believe that both sexes, beginning in early adolescence, they experience high level of sexual desire. Okay, so around age 13 to 14, following a circumcision ritual, boys are given instruction in the ways of pleasing a young girl. After 2 weeks, an older sexually experienced woman has sexual intercourse with the boy to instruct him further on how to sexually satisfy a woman. Now, girls the same age are instructed by older women on how to be orgasmic. And what that means, orgasmic, in terms of the girls finally learn through the efforts of a man, right? And they use quotes. They say a good man. So if the woman's partner fails to satisfy her, she is likely to leave him. So being satisfied by this man is the basis of their initial relationship. She may also ruin his reputation with other women by denouncing his lack of skill. So young men and women are expected to have many sexual experiences prior to marriage. The Manjaya believe that sexuality is the strongest during adolescence. And as a result, the Manjaya leave young adulthood and they experience a rapid decline in sexual desire and activity and settle into sexually contented adulthood. Okay? That's the Manjaya. Okay, I skipped over the Mihunaku. The Mihunaku, they believe that kissing is merely a form of exchanging fluids. They don't understand why kissing is a thing in Western culture or American culture or many other cultures. They view this as something that's grotesque, and they purely use sexuality as a form of reproduction. Okay, to them, it's very similar to the Donnie, right? The Donnie, where sexuality is a form of reproduction. Sexual intercourse should be quick, and it should always end at male ejaculation, where female orgasm is not something that is seen as important. Okay, it's unknown. Female orgasm is unknown to them. So following childbirth, both mothers and fathers go through 5 years of sexual abstinence. The Donnie are extreme example of a case in which culture, rather than biology, shapes their sexual attraction. This is the Donnie. Now, in the Victorian era, this typically was in the beginning of the 19th century, where white middle-class Americans believed that women had very little sexual desire, and if they experienced desire at all, it was for reproductive purposes and for the wish to have children. Reproduction entailed the necessity of engaging in sexual intercourse. So women were viewed as asexual during the Victorian era. Can you imagine that? Men were believed to have these raging sexual appetites, where both men and women believed that male sexuality was dangerous. It was uncontrolled. It was animal-like. The fact that a man's penis can get hard, and he's not able to control when, where, and why it gets hard. They viewed that as demonic, and they viewed women as angelic and being asexual. And the only time that women should be expected or should want to have sex is in order to bear children. This also led to the separation of sex as a form of love. So between the 1960s and the 1970s, this brought about the sexual revolution. Okay. So when we talk about sexual orientation, heterosexuality is being attracted to the opposite sex. Homosexuality is being attracted to the same sex. Bisexuality is being attracted to both sexes. So social acceptance of sexual orientation, it differs among cultures. Now, the ancient Greece, they were all about sexual expression. They believed in this. In fact, they felt like same-sex relationships was the highest form of love, specifically male to male. So the male to male relationship was based on love and reciprocity. Okay, that is, you do onto your male partner as you want done onto you. So sexuality was one component, but in their relationship, the code was the older male was to initiate a sexual relationship with a younger boy. Okay, the youth initially resisted, but only as after the older gentleman courted the younger man, with gifts, words of love, words of affirmation, was that young boy to reciprocate. Okay, in terms of reciprocate is what I mean by giving back what was given to you. So the two men would typically form a close bond, an emotional bond, right? There was a connection over time. It didn't happen right away. So the older man was kind of like the youth's coach, his mentor, as well as his lover. Okay, now we're talking about the younger boy is probably around the age of 12 or 13. And when we talk about the older man, he can be in his early 20s on up. So as a youth entered adulthood, the erotic bond between the two evolved into a deep friendship. But after the youth became an adult, they tend to marry a woman and later initiated a relationship with an adolescent boy. So even though they had these sexual experiences as a young boy with an older male, they still were expected to marry a woman. The Greeks, however, they discouraged exclusive male-to-male relationship into adulthood, into marriage. In terms of this, they felt like this wouldn't be conducive for marriage and rearing children. And they were required to continue the family and the society of matrimony with a woman. So men regarded their wives primarily as domestic and the bearers of children. This is in the Greek world. Now, the Zambians of New Guinea, the sexual orientation was malleable. It was very similar to the Greeks. They say young boys began sexual activities with older boys. Very, very similar to the Greeks, right? Where activities with the both sexes during adolescence, and then they would engage exclusively with male to female activities into adulthood. So very similar to Greeks. Zombians kind of did that same thing. So again, this is a breakdown by culture. I have some lectures that have to do with what has happened in the Eastern Hemisphere in terms of Asia. I have some Kama Sutra things I want to introduce to you all. We're going to have a good time this quarter, and we're going to learn a lot. Now, we have to talk about gender. Okay, so biology defines men and women, right? But culture and other factors, they tend to shape our masculinity and our femininity. So although sexual interest and orientation may be influenced by culture, it's difficult for some people to imagine that culture has anything to do with gender and the socially constructed roles. Is something that I talked about in a prior lecture. So behaviors, activities, and attributes society considers appropriate for men and women that will shape how we think about our own sexuality, right, as being wrong or right. So other terms used to describe gender are gender normative, cisgender, people whose sex assignment at birth corresponds to their gender identity and expression. So for those that do not ascribe to gender normative behaviors or expression, the umbrella term is transgender, right? That's a broad term that describes those gender expression or identity that is not the same, that is not congruent with sex assigned at birth, and whose gender is not validated by dominant culture. So transgender is inclusive of transsexuality, a phenomenon in which a person is intent to live through actions, dress, hormone therapy, surgery as a gender other than which he or she was assigned at birth. Transvestism is the wearing of clothes of or passing as a member of the opposite sex. Okay, so I said all that to say that in the Native American culture, the two spirits, most Americans consider transsexuality a phenomenon in which the person's genitals and or identification as a man or a woman are not the same as how they feel in their heart and in their mind. Okay, so in certain cultures, in some communities, the anatomical man identifying as a woman might be considered a man-woman. So in the Native American, they call this term the two-spirit. Now, the two-spirit, the man and woman, they have a very high status, special privileges within the Native American, and they downplay the homosexual persona, right? So in South Asian society, the third gender is known as the Hijra. Okay, this was regarded as sacred. They perform as dancers or musicians at weddings and religious ceremonies, as well as providing blessings for health. They're almost considered like a shaman. So they provide blessings for health, prosperity, fertility. It is almost always the men who become two spirits in these cultures, in these religions. Very few cases of women doing the role reversal. So two spirits are often considered individuals who possess great spiritual power. Okay. The immense diversity of sexual behaviors across cultures and at times immediately calls into question the appropriateness of labeling these behaviors as natural or unnatural, normal or abnormal, right or wrong. Most often than not, such labels are not objective descriptions about behaviors, but statements of how we feel about those behaviors. So when we talk about natural, to decide if a sexual behavior is natural or unnatural, we must first examine the standard of nature against which we compare to be a natural form of behavior. Okay? So the whole natural and unnatural thing, we are typically indicating whether the behavior conforms to our understanding, our beliefs, our culture's sexual norms. Our sexual norms appear natural because this is what we've internalized since birth. Since infancy, we have been taught this in our household and in our communities. So they, over time, have become instinctive. So we question, does this conform to the average? Does this conform to patterns? How do people actually behave? Am I normal? These things bring up all these particular questions, right? So when we talk about a variation, this is exactly what this class is designed to do. It's going to expose you to a lot of different variations in sexuality. We also refer to this as a continuum. Okay, where on this continuum do you fall? But what you need to know there, what you're learning in this class is there is no natural, there is no unnatural way of thinking, but it all has to do with how we feel about ourselves instinctively based on how we have been acculturated from birth, right? So when we talk about diverging or opposing viewpoints, this is based on things that we have learned. Couple of terms that you're going to learn in this quarter: exhibitionism. This is performing a sexual act in front of others. This is getting excitement or getting a thrill, getting a rush out of performing sexual acts in front of other people. Whereas voyeurism is getting that rush, that excitement from watching. Now, fetishism has to do with something that is viewed as abnormal, being attracted to doing these things. And we're going to talk about different types of fetishes in this class. I have a panel that's going to come and do a talk on what it means to be a part of the BDSM community or the fetishism community. And again, we have to undo that thinking of what is right and wrong, what is natural and unnatural. So standards for evaluating sexual behavior, they do exist, right? And we also know that certain sexual behaviors can be very harmful to individuals, as well as folks that are part of our community. Okay. So when we talk about rape or child molestation or obscene phone calls, these are things that can be trauma producing for a lifetime, even if they happen in that moment. Masturbatory asphyxia, people have died from this. This is masturbating while having oxygen taken away from you. So it typically happen with something being tied around the neck or being choked, and people have died from this. And we know that rape, child molestation, or even an obscene phone call that you were a victim to when you were young, these lifelong ramifications can happen from these. So another thing that this course is going to explore is the psychological standards for determining the harmfulness of sexual behavior. So coercion, being forced, okay, or using sex as a form of manipulation, the potential harm to oneself, and personal distress. So these are the things that we're going to take a deep dive in throughout the course of this quarter. And I'm excited that you signed up for this class. And I look forward to speaking with each of you. We're going to have guest speakers every Tuesday night. And this will conclude chapter 1. Again, be on the lookout for the questions that have to do with chapter 1. If you have any questions or anything that I talked about that you want to know more about, we have our good friend Google, where you can always type things up at any given time. And I look forward to working with you. This is Professor Alexander, chapter 1. Be on the lookout for the questions.